I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 59 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today we will consider Bill C-252 during the first hour before proceeding to drafting instructions for the report on children's health in camera for the second half of the meeting. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting, which today was remarkably easy to do because there are no remote participants. I will now welcome Ms. Patricia Lattanzio, the Member of Parliament from Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel, and the sponsor of Bill C-252, an act to amend the Food and Drugs Act, prohibition of food and beverage marketing directed at children. We are also joined by two officials from Health Canada in case there are questions for the department about the legislation, and they are David Lee, Chief Regulatory Officer, Health Products and Food Branch, and Dr. Supriya Sharma, Chief Medical Advisor, Health Products and Food Branch. They're in the room but not at the table, but certainly available to you if you have questions for them. Either after Ms. Lattanzio's presentation or as we go through clause by clause. So the plan, colleagues, is to have one round of questions from each party so that we can get through the clause by clause and on to committee business. So with that, Ms. Lattanzio, thank you so much for being here. You have up to 5 minutes for your opening statement. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue et à vous la parole.
I want to welcome you, and you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And good morning to all committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss and present my private member's bill C-252, an act to amend the Food and Drugs Act, also known as the Child Health Protection Act. Bill C-252 aims to help the youngest and most impressionable Canadians maintain and improve their health by restricting their exposure to the advertisements of food with excessive amounts of sugar, sodium, and saturated fats. I am confident that all members of this committee can agree on the harms that diet with excessive amounts of sugars, sodium, and saturated fats can have on the health of Canadians and, more importantly, our children. In fact, research has shown that unhealthy diets with excessive amounts of these nutrients are linked to a higher lifetime risk of high blood pressure, high level of cholesterol, diabetes, cardiovascular, and other chronic diseases. Despite the risks associated with these kinds of diets, Canadians remain the second largest buyers of ultra-processed foods and beverages in the world, second only to the Americans. It is clear that things need to change. That is why my bill is proposing to prohibit the advertisements of food with an excessive amount of sugar, sodium, and saturated fats to children. This is based on the key fact, which we know from extensive research, that developing healthy eating habits early in life is important to help protect children from suffering health problems in adulthood. We know perfectly well the high rate of publicity and advertisements that children are exposed to every day. From TV to billboards to the internet, children are bombarded by hundreds of ads on a daily basis. A 2017 report on the health of Canadians has shown that over 90% of food and beverage product advertisements viewed by children online and on TV have been for products that have a high content of sugars, sodium, and saturated fats. Evidence shows that food advertising strongly influences children's food preferences and consumption patterns. For example, a Yale University experiment demonstrated that 7 to 11-year-old children who watched a cartoon show which included food commercials ate 45% more snack foods while watching the show compared to children who watched the same cartoon show with non-food commercials. It is therefore not surprising to learn that kids aged 9 through 13 years of age get more calories, almost 60%, from ultra-processed foods than any other age group. Having had young children myself, I know just how difficult it could be to ensure that our children develop good eating habits. Although we make sure that they get all the healthy nutrients they need, the reality is that our kids are constantly being exposed to and influenced by ads which are working very hard to entice them to products that we know contribute to a poor diet. The food industry has also recently recognized and acknowledged the need to better regulate the advertising to children. That is probably why, in 2022, some of the largest food and beverage companies in Canada adopted the Code for Responsible Advertising of Food and Beverage Products to Children, which ad standards will begin administrating later in 2023. Although the proposed code is a good effort, its voluntary nature is not enough to tackle and solve the issue. Relying on adhesion on voluntary basis and on self-regulation will allow restaurants, food companies, food retailers, and advertisers to abstain from signing on, or will allow them to withdraw their membership to the code at their convenience. Furthermore, the code explicitly excludes key advertising techniques such as packaging and labels, which constitute tactics and sources of exposures that are known to appeal to and or influence children. This exemption therefore showcases the important limits of the industry's self-declared criteria. It is therefore imperative that a solid government policy and framework are needed to achieve the results that we must obtain and that our children deserve. Honourable members, I ask that you seriously consider the positive impacts of this bill in order to ensure a healthier future for our children. I thank you in advance for your efforts in advancing Bill C-252 towards its adoption and implementation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Latanzio. We're going to proceed now with rounds of... yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this opening statements by Ms. Latanzio. My understanding is the general rule of this committee up to this point is to have witnesses come when we are discussing private members' bills in addition to the sponsor of the private members' bill. And this was said in such a way so that we are going to have this question not hear from any other witnesses and then go straight to clause by clause, which deviates from our traditional practice. Can you confirm why? That wasn't a decision of the committee, from my remembrance.
It was a decision of the committee. Mr. Davies?
One of the few advantages of being a grizzled veteran is I have some corporate memory of this issue. In 2018, the Child Health Protection Act, which covered this issue, was introduced by Senator Nancy Green-Rain, and that act came to this committee. It was considered by HESA in 2018. At that time, we heard from 18 witnesses. We received 16 written briefs, and that bill was also reviewed by the Senate Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology. They heard from 22 witnesses and received 12 written briefs. The bill had very strong support in the House of Commons and initially unanimous support in the Senate before the bill died on the order paper because of the 2019 election. So I just think it's important for all members of the committee to realize and note that we have had this issue very well canvassed and heard from stakeholders as well. That might reassure my colleague.
Mr. General, on the same point of order?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Ms. Latanzio, good friend, Ms. Latanzio, for making the presentation here. Don't want to belabor this point. You know, it's obvious it's the will of the committee on where we go and what we do here. I just think in the time between the House and today, we have certainly been been inundated with a number of emails from really people across Canada that would like to hear perhaps a bit more testimony. I don't think it's necessarily needs to happen as part of. It doesn't have to disrupt the day, if you will. If the committee looks to and seeks it to add additional witnesses onto it, I think it would probably be a reasonable idea to put forward. So again, don't want to belabor it, Chair, but certainly I think it might be worthwhile to hear from a few other people at this stage.
Dr. Kitchen?
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate it. And as my colleagues have indicated, and as our colleague, Mr. Davies, has pointed out, there are issues that have been brought up, and going back to Senator Rain's legislation or piece of literature, basically the bill being put forward, there have been a couple of changes to it, not a lot, but some minor ones, because you can't resubmit the same piece of legislation, but there are changes to it. And as my colleague has indicated, a number of us have received emails from various groups looking at opportunities to speak. With that said, I agree. A lot of this has been brought up in previous iterations of the bill. Ultimately, as we move forward, I think we need to also look at the procedural process that Canadians expect of the government, and that being that when a PMB is brought forward, that it is given an opportunity for people to speak to it. And as to the length of it, I think it could be curtailed in the sense of the length of times and the number of witnesses. But I think it behooves us as Canadians to at least have that opportunity and to follow due process as we normally do. And so I would at least ask respectfully if the consideration of this situation.
Thank you, Dr. Kitchen. Ms. Goodrich, and then Mr. Van Couverden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate that this bill in a similar format came forward and was there back in 2018, but there are parliamentarians that were elected since that point in time, such as myself, and while I have gone through and seen some of those concerns, we're not dealing with the same time frame and we're not dealing with the same exact issues. And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're always looking at these bills and treating them with that new factor. Had there been a brief prepared for this committee with all of that previous information and every single witness and et cetera, and that been the answer rather than having witnesses and had that conversation while we were in a meeting, perhaps I could accept that as an answer, but to just say, oh, because we've studied this before, we're going to choose not to study it this time. Just trust us. And I don't think that's the best practice of any parliament, quite frankly. That's not how we treat government bills, and I don't think that's how we should be treating private members' bills. And I think that it's incumbent upon us, after I've heard from a number of stakeholders in the last few weeks that do have some minor concerns, and I think that it is valuable to make sure that we're hearing from stakeholders on the actual substance of this particular bill and not applying the same arguments that were made to previous bills just because that's easier and quicker to do.
Mr. Van Couverden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, there's been a little bit of ambiguity this morning about stakeholders out in the ecosystem in Canada that would like to speak to this bill, and I think it's also incumbent on us to be specific for people who may be listening and may be interested in who out there has concerns with this bill. It will come by no surprise to anybody that it's the same group of people that have opposed it before. The Canadian Beverage Association and people who have a vested interest in the advertising dollars behind the very profitable nature of encouraging children to drink very sugary beverages and eat snacks that are unhealthy. So, we're faced with a quandary here. Who are we here to stand up for? the Health Committee. What's our obligation as members of the Health Committee? And I think our obligation of the Health Committee is to stand up for kids and to step forward and make sure that this bill, as it has been presented in the past, we've heard from those organizations and we recognize that these companies have a vested interest and a really, really solid financial rationale for wanting to be able to continue to market sugary drinks and unhealthy snacks to kids. I think we also, we've heard from children's health advocates over the last couple of months about the really significant impact that those products have on children's health. And I'm of the opinion that we need to move forward. We frankly need to move quickly. We've heard from the organizations with concerns, and I think just because I wasn't elected prior to 2019 doesn't mean that information is not available to me. It is quite thoroughly, and I've had a look at some of those conversations. And from my perspective, and I think my colleagues on this side agree, I'm good. I'm good to move forward. Those reports are there. Those former HESA studies were done. The opposition that this bill encountered in the Senate was really unfortunate a couple of years ago. It really delayed progress on Canada being a healthier country. I'm not willing to delay this any farther. It's already been too long, and I know who I'm here for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. President.
Monsieur Thériault, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here with my colleague, Mr. Davies, who has experience to bring to this. And basically, I agree with Mr. Van Koeverden. However, something bothers me, and that is that the minister mentioned that the Canadian Advertising Association has developed a guide, a set of practices, which is a new element. And this is something that doesn't seem to have been discussed in 2018. We know that this code is supposed to come into effect in July of this year. So if there is one new aspect, that would be it, in my opinion. In Quebec, we have had legislation to protect consumers for a long time, but perhaps we can't actually meet our objective if those in the field aren't working with us. We need to work with the stakeholders. So maybe they would have amendments that could be good and that might improve the bill, and we could accept them. But Mr. Van Koeverden's objectives are ones that I agree with. So if we could find a compromise today, it might be to target those particular groups that seem to want to reach the same objectives as we do. And I think that could help us move forward.
Ms. Goodridge, and then Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think much of what was brought up by Monsieur Thériault is very pointed and important. And I do think that while Mr. Van Koeverden has signaled a couple of the stakeholders that have made requests wanting to appear, there's also the Canadian Cancer Society that has reached out and other stakeholders that I've heard from, and people, just normal moms and dads. And I know who I'm here for. I'm here for regular, everyday, hardworking moms and dads. And I frankly think that it is a slap in the face to say, oh, this was studied back in 2018. Things have changed, but that's fine. We don't have to look at that. Let's just put this forward without giving it the due consideration. Is this actually applicable? How can we actually put this in? What are the concerns of industry? How have they identified and addressed some of these concerns? And does this go too far enough? I think these are all questions that we should be asking ourselves as legislators to make sure that we have the best possible legislation. And if this legislation was so perfect, then why does the government have so many amendments to a government piece of private members' bill legislation? And so I think that's another important question that we should be asking ourselves here. If this private members' bill was completely flawless, we wouldn't have a pile of amendments coming from the government to change this, we would just be here with a handful of amendments from opposition parties. And so I think that that's an important fact that we have to take into consideration. The government isn't even happy with the full contents of this bill, because if they were, they wouldn't have put forward these amendments.
Dr. Kitchen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate our comments and Mr. Terrio's comments. I think a lot of them are very, very astute and very wise. And, I think Mr. Van Koeverden and his comments about standing up for kids, and I agree. I mean, we need to be there standing up for kids. I'm a diabetic. I understand that aspect of things. I remember my days when I coached hockey and the challenges I had when I was coaching, back in the day when we used to call it squirt and pee-wee and these other levels. The reality was that we were there and we're watching kids running to the concession stands to buy these caffeinated drinks or these sugar drinks or power drinks to try and give them because they saw the advertising that's out there, and those are huge challenges. As a coach, it was extremely challenging. As a doctor, it was extremely challenging to try and rationalize that with these individuals. But the other biggest challenge was also rationalizing with their parents. And ultimately, it is their decision that makes that decision as to looking after their children. They're the ones who need to make those decisions as to what their children see, what their children consume. And so those are things I think that definitely need to be discussed. We have heard, as I said, from individuals, constituents who might be concerned, as well as other agencies that are putting their concerns in place. Rightly or wrongly, the bottom line is, as a committee, we're here to hear both sides of the story. We're not to make an assumption based on one or the other. We should be hearing both sides of the story before we make that decision and our challenges as we move forward. So I do believe it's something that we should at least consider as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Kitchen. Mr. Davies?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I don't doubt the bona fides of everybody in this committee, and I think everybody wants to do the right thing. But I think a bit of a brief summary of history is important. In 2007, the food and beverage industry launched the Canadian Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative, and that basically is a voluntary code that was limited to broadcast advertising. So that's been in place for quite a while. Health Canada has indicated for several years now that it intends to address the issue of marketing of unhealthy food to children. Its 2016 healthy eating strategy, that's 7 years ago, included the statement, quote, Health Canada will restrict the commercial marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids. In December 2017, so about 6 years ago, the department released its consultation report, Marketing of Unhealthy Food and Beverages to Children in Canada, which outlined stakeholder responses to the department's proposed approach towards restricting such advertising. The current mandate letter issued to the Minister of Health, as well as the ones issued, I think every single one since 2015, has included an instruction to either introduce or support restrictions on the commercial marketing of food and beverages to children. And as my colleague, Mr. Theriault, has pointed out, Quebec has had legislation in this area, in fact, much broader legislation for many years. So a couple things I want to say. There's nothing new here. In fact, what I would say is we're much delayed. We're much delayed in introducing legislation. Number two, it is simply, I don't think, a tenable statement to suggest that we haven't heard from people. Every stakeholder, every parent, every group has had multiple opportunities to have their input. In terms of government amendments to this bill, I've reviewed every amendment from both sides of this room, and the amendments from the government, I think, are more in the nature of administrative or honing amendments. They don't change the substance of the bill. They kind of shape the definitions to put it in more of a regulation-friendly way. So The last thing I'm going to say is we're talking about the health of our children here. And I don't think it's an unreasonable issue to raise, have we canvassed this issue enough? I just think that the record is very clear. We have. I agree with my colleagues that weren't on this committee in 2018, but that record is there, as Mr. Vancouver had pointed out. The Hansards are there to read it all. If any member of this committee wants to find out what stakeholders have to say about this, it's there. We don't have to hear it in person again. Now, where I'll conclude is if we do hear it in person, there's one result of this, and that's we'll delay. We'll delay legislation that is geared at improving our children's health we've been waiting almost better part of a decade to bring to this House. And the question I would ask is, for what purpose? Like, what's gained? Are we going to hear something new? No. Are we going to have people who wanted to have their say been prevented from doing so? No. And I think that when I contrast that to the impact that this will have on 7-year-old children, 9-year-old children, 11-year-old children, 12-year-old children, who, we've heard of this committee many times. There's an epidemic of childhood obesity in this country. This goes to a very strong matter of public health. And I think we'll have an opportunity to question Ms. Latanzio, the person who introduced this bill. But I think it's time to act. It's really time to act. And if I thought that we were going to hear anything new or novel, or if this bill were significantly different in any way from the bill that's been introduced in the past, then I would support my Conservative colleagues' motion in this regard, but it's not. This is the same legislation on the same issue that's been much delayed, much studied, much heard from. And I think we as parliamentarians have a duty to the children of this country to act.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. So just to be clear, this discussion actually started on a point of order, and there isn't a motion on the floor. And in fact, to bring a motion would be out of order until we're no longer dealing with a point of order. But the Conservatives will get the first speaking slot when we go to questions. That would be the time to bring a motion if a motion is coming forward. So we're still on the point of order, and Dr. Ellis has the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to my colleagues. I know perhaps I missed some of this debate, but in my mind, the one thing that we need to be very clear about is what does the science show when we're talking about enacting legislation. And I think the important point also to consider is when you look at the science on a bigger picture with respect to creating change, whether it's a personal decision or whether it's a government decision to change your behavior, we know that the science with respect to that is not very supportive in terms of saying to people that you should change your behavior, you should eat differently, you should exercise more. Those are things that when we ask people to do them, the likelihood of change is minimal. And I guess the issue at hand is we've had an ongoing situation in Quebec where similar and perhaps more widespread legislation has been enacted. What do the studies show there? What has the outcome been? Have we actually impacted childhood obesity? Because in my mind, we could talk about this for days, but if we're not going to make a difference in the lives of children, then why are we doing anything at all? That's the question. I know that my colleague from the NDP, Mr. Davies, is exceedingly convinced that this is going to work. My question is there science out there to support the fact that this is actually going to work? Is it going to make a change in the lives of Canadian children? And if it's not, then we need to look at something different as opposed to continuing to do the same thing that's been tried in this committee and perhaps in the House of Commons for many years ongoing over and over and over again. So that would be my biggest question is what is the science that is attached to this? And if there has been another set of legislation that's been enacted in another jurisdiction, what does that? What are the outcomes of that change in legislation? And if we're doing the right thing, great. Then I think in the spirit of what we've seen at not every time in this committee, but many times in this committee, that we should move forward for the benefit of the health of Canadians. But if we're not, then that doesn't mean that we should accept something and say, well, it's as good as we can do. Is it really as good as we can do? And if it's not, then we need to change it precipitously and make sure it is. I agree with Mr. Davies wholeheartedly that there is an epidemic of obesity here. You don't need to be a physician to understand that. There is. But how can we actually change that? How do we make it different? How do we improve it? Because we all know that spending, as my colleagues across the aisle would say, $200 billion on health care is not improving the outcomes of health of people in this country. So how do we do that? How do we go about creating good legislation? That's the question that I would have. And also, the other issue is that continuing on, and I believe one of my colleagues said this already, but the spirit of this committee is one of cooperation and one of saying, hey, if we want to hear from stakeholders with respect to an issue, then we should. And that is how we've operated this committee over the last 18 months that I've been here. So to deviate from that, does that mean that we're now going to deviate from every other procedure that we possibly have on this committee of how we do things? Perhaps other committees I've been on, when the member wants to interrupt a witness, they do so. On this committee, we do it differently. We say we'll allow the witness to answer in the same amount of time as the question was asked. I think that's a reasonable way to do things. However, if we're going to have a wholesale change in how we actually do business in this committee, then I'm open to change with that. There's lots of people I'd like to interrupt. And in fact, I'm sure there's people who'd like to interrupt me now, and I will stop talking and turn it over to you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Sidhu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that we'll all want to do good things for children. As my colleague said, obesity rate is going to very, very high. And I remember that when we are talking about the calendar, I think last week, we were planning that. And as Mr. Davies said, 2018, we heard from many witnesses, I think 18 witnesses, and the answers is all there. And today there's a chance to, we can ask questions to Ms. Latanzio, and then when the implementation phase, there's going to be consultation, and there's going to a lot of things going to be happen. And let's work together. We're already working together on many things, and this is a very, very important topic for our children. And I think we should ask questions to Mr. Latanzios. I really want to say thank you to bringing this bill. And without delay, I think we should all work together towards our children's health. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Hanley?
I just wanted to reiterate a few points for the record. One is I think Mr. Davies and Mr. Van Gouverdon have really both eloquently spoken very well. So I won't reiterate their emphasis on the need to proceed with urgency, but it is important. Because this is about the point of order and not the evidence, I think it would be useful to be able to listen to our witnesses, because I think the effect of marketing on children is clear. There is a substantial evidence. And as a committee, although we have an obligation to hear from all sides of a question, we also have an obligation to build on knowledge that we have already accumulated. And there is an urgency to proceed with this bill after years of delay. To echo Ms. Sidhu's final point, there will be room for organizations to have a voice in this both in the Senate and in the regulatory process. So this is not the last chance for organizations to provide input as to how this will ultimately be published in regulation. So thank you for that.
Mr. Thériault?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I earlier proposed a compromise. I didn't present it as a motion because I wanted to let my colleagues express themselves, and I wanted to hear what they had to say. And so now I would like to present this idea as a motion. So my idea would be to have targeted consultations, and the only new aspect that I am aware of is the one I mentioned. So I think this is the compromise that we should bring forward. So my motion is that we should hear from the Canadian Advertisers Association. So that is my motion.
OK, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Thériault. The discussion started with a point of order, and so we cannot allow a motion to be presented in a discussion that started with a point of order. So we're still in that discussion. It is certainly appropriate for you to present a motion when you have the floor. However, we cannot do that during the discussion we are having right now on the point of order. I am sorry about that because I would really prefer to have that kind of targeted discussion. And the discussion right now has evolved, and we are into a broad discussion. Usually a point of order is quite specific, but we've all been contributing to the conversation. So now, Mr. Van Coverton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to say anything because I already had I put my 2 cents in already, but we veered out of the lane of saying we should hear from everybody. We haven't yet heard from some folks who are on the record on speaking on this issue not that long ago, to Dr. Ellis outright challenging the science on this. We have Dr. Sharma here and questioning whether or not it's efficacious to move forward with this type of legislation and questioning whether or not this will actually lead to healthier outcomes. That's counterproductive to why we're here today. We're not here today to challenge the science or to suggest that maybe the science is unclear on whether or not marketing to kids actually leads to unhealthy outcomes for them. Hearing from all sides is different than challenging the very, very well documented facts that are out there if one chooses to look. So I would ask that if we have any questions on the science, Dr. Sharma is here, happens to be an expert on the issue, and can speak to the science on the issue. But otherwise, I think we should move forward because this is quite frankly a waste of time, and we've already been through this. We already decided that we were going to come here today to listen to the sponsor and move forward on the bill.
Yeah, we've also veered a long way from the original point of order, but I'm quite reluctant to cut off this discussion when people still want to speak on it. I think it would be probably better if we proceeded formally with the commencement of the meeting and introduced a motion either along the lines of what Mr. Thériault had suggested or otherwise, but I didn't seize control sooner, and this is where we're stuck. So, Dr. Kitchen, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Mr. Thériault's opportunity to present an option and maybe a compromise. I think that's a great thing. I was initially going to suggest that maybe we suspend for about 5 minutes so we could discuss that. But with that said, that was purely at the time. I think I'll defer that at this point in time, and I am done. Thanks.
There are no further speakers on the list. We will now, there is now a speaker on the list, Mr. Thériault.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to introduce my motion. Is the point of order finished, our discussion? You can do that when you have the floor. You will be the third person on the list, and then you will have the floor to do so.
De la parole.
Right now, Ms. Goodridge still has the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think in hearing some of the conversation around the table, I really respect and appreciate the compromise that was brought forward from Monsieur Thériault, and I would like to move a motion that the committee hold one-hour witness meeting for C-252 prior to clause by clause to be held on this Thursday, March 30th, so as to not delay any further. I think that it's a very reasonable compromise. It allows people to bring forward a very limited amount of witnesses. This is not about delaying the bill, as was suggested by the opposition and by the Liberals. It was, well, you know, sometimes you can just wait your turn and you can interject when you have the floor, quite frankly. But I think that this is something that's quite reasonable. This is a space where we can find some compromise on this to make sure that this is going in the space towards what it is, and hear from the witnesses on some of the amendments and see if there's possibly some other very simple amendments that could be made to strengthen the bill, to make sure that we're bringing forward the best possible legislation for Canadians and for our kids. Like, this is something that this is critically important. As a young mom, this is something that is pressing and is this is conversation that happens in all the mom Facebook groups on a regular basis. And I just think that it's incumbent upon us as legislators to make sure that we're doing the work and hearing from the witnesses to make sure that it's meeting the standards. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goodridge. The motion is in order. The debate is on the motion. Mr. Thériault.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, the only new aspect, and this would help us not to delay our work, would be to invite the Canadian Advertising Association, and that was mentioned in the remarks earlier. So I would like to propose a sub-amendment to have the only witnesses that we would receive for 1 hour would be the Advertising Association.
Motion which is in order, and that is that the only witness be the association, the Broadcasting Association. I believe it's the sector council for that. So the debate is now on the amendment. Are we ready for the Dr. Pelosi?
I guess my concern with that would be you're going to get one side of the story. You're going to get advertisers who are primarily concerned about limiting advertising without hearing all of the evidence in support of limiting that advertising. So you're going to get a quite biased hour that I think observers then looking at what happens subsequently may be overly influenced by having just one speaker beforehand. And so it seems to me like I agree in not reopening this can of worms at all, but to open it a little bit just for the advertisers to get in their objections doesn't seem to me fair.
Mr. Vancouverton, on the amendment?
I mean, I was reticent to even entertain the idea of more meetings on this, and if we're only going to hear from one side, then I'm completely against it. It took me 1 second to Google. The advertisers have already come here, and they've already talked to this. The Honourable Nancy Green-Rain was an amazing senator, awesome Olympic champion too, conservative senator, I might add. And this has been done. Been there, done that. Takes 10 seconds to Google it. Actually, the chair of HESA at the time was also the MP for Carmel and Colchester, so it's pretty easy to find on the internet. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested in the position of any advertisers, marketers, Canadian Beverage Association, their position hasn't changed.
Mr. Thériault?
Well, it's one thing to say that they've already been here, but it's another to be able to question them on the code that they have developed and their guide, and that was mentioned by the minister. And it will be in effect this coming July. We're talking about legislation that will limit advertising, right? So that group, it seems to me, would be very relevant to hear from. And we will be able to ask all the questions we want about the code, about their intent. I think that the legislation is positive, but if we hear from them, then perhaps they may indicate some possibilities for improving the bill. They say that they have the same objective that we have, the very same. And so that's why I think we could hear from them for 10 minutes, and I think it would be a really good idea to do that. We're on a fast track here. We should hear from those people that are very important players, and we can work with them. So that's my response to Mr. Van Couverden, that he seems to be playing down our intelligence a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate encore toutes les mots qui étaient.
I appreciate everything that was said by Mr. Thériault. I think it is extremely important not to disparage people here on the committee and those that come before us. At my age, I know how to use Google, and I have done my homework on the internet, but I think that the last time we had a similar bill, then that's one thing, but that was 5 years ago. So we can't simply say we can't hear from witnesses because that was done back then. It eliminates the possibility to see whether things have changed or not. Maybe they haven't. Now we do have this code. We have these changes. So I think we should do everything possible to make sure we make the best decision we can for Canadians.
Mr. Davies?
Thank you. Well, again, if we didn't have a bill, if this wasn't a bill that had been introduced before, if we hadn't had extensive consultations before, then I would agree with my colleagues. The other thing that I think is important is we as MPs bring a lot of information and knowledge that we acquire through the course of our interactions to this committee. Not everything that we know is heard here. And so here's what we do know. I'm going to repeat this. In 2007, 16 years ago, the food and beverage industry launched the Canadian Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative, and that's what brought in the voluntary code. That's 16 years it's been in place. As Dr. Ellis already acknowledged, which we all acknowledge, again, I guess, to repeat him, you don't have to be a doctor to know this. There's an epidemic of childhood obesity in this country. I don't think you have to be Sherlock Holmes to put those two things together. The voluntary code ain't working. Do we need to hear from witnesses to cement that fact? No, we do not. You know, when Bill S-228, that was the Child Health Protection Act. I think it's same title that Ms. Latanzio has put to this bill. When that died in the order paper in 2019, researchers at the University of Toronto found that food industry interactions with government outnumbered non-industry interactions on that bill, and they looked at 3,800 interactions, including meetings, correspondence, and lobbying, in the 3 years before that bill failed, and they found that 80% of those interactions were from industry, compared to public health or not-for-profit organizations. So let's just name the elephant in the room. This bill has been studied to death. It has been consulted to death. Every single stakeholder entity who's wanted to have a say in it has had their say in it. We know what their positions are. The bill has not changed significantly. This bill introduced today is substantially the same as the one introduced by Senator Nancy Green-Rain, there is no difference in the general public except for one thing. The childhood obesity epidemic has probably gotten worse. So what's to hear? I'll tell you, the advertisers are going to come say they don't like the bill. Anybody want to, say otherwise? I'm curious to hear if anybody's going to seriously contend that that's otherwise. They don't like it. That's why they propose a voluntary code of conduct. And again, if we didn't have 16 years of evidence of what the impact of a voluntary code of conduct was, then I'm sure Ms. Latanzio wouldn't have saw fit to use her order of precedence to introduce this very important bill. So, we don't need to hear from anybody. There's an opportunity for every member of this committee to question Ms. Latanzio, to question the ministry staff, and also to introduce amendments. So if anybody thinks the bill is not strong enough, or they feel that it needs to be improved, to introduce amendments. In fact, everybody's had that opportunity. So I would just propose that we defeat this motion. There's nothing to be served from hearing from one witness next week, or this week, or frankly any other time. And you know what? At the end of the day, if you don't like the bill, vote against it. It's everybody's democratic right in this room. If the Conservatives don't like this bill, if they think that the evidence isn't strong enough, if they think the bill isn't appropriate, they can vote against the bill.
Mr. Van Couverden.
Thanks. Just very briefly, I 100% support Mr. Davies. I agree 100%. The industries have been consulted, and they've been consulting on this bill for the last 5 years. They've not been left out of this process whatsoever. And I just point out that in 2018, the last time this bill was studied, the main thing that the CMA, the Canadian Marketing Association, was asking for was a reduction from the age threshold of 17 to 13, which by some accounts, unfortunately, I think this bill is actually weaker as a result of that. You can make the argument that if you can drive a car, you can probably choose to have a Coca-Cola, fine. And everybody still can choose to have a Coca-Cola. It's just whether or not you can market to them. This bill, we are talking about youth under 13. So the process to bend a little bit, to break a little bit, to make the bill a little bit more industry friendly we've already done that, and the evidence is clear. We're talking about kids under 13, not 17 anymore, as they asked for in 2018.
Dr. Ellis?
Well, thank you, Chair. I guess the message is clear here that we don't need this committee anymore. All we need is Mr. Davies and Mr. Van Couverden to give us all the information so that we could simply allow the costly coalition to figure out how we should do things here. I'm not a fan of that. I mean, again, I'll point back to the fact that we always have had witnesses. I wasn't here in 2018. I don't have, quite frankly, the time to read 5 years of Hansard to figure out exactly what was said, but I understand that Mr. Van Couverden can sit around reading 5 years of Hansard, obviously. But that being said, I think the issue here is what's fair. And if it's fair, then let's do it. And if it's not, let's move on. Let's vote. I don't particularly want to have Mr. Davies and Mr. Van Couverden telling this committee how to work. And I think we need to hear from witnesses. If people don't agree, let's vote. Let's move on. Guess who's been talking out the clock? It's not this side of the House, it's that side. So let's move forward. No issue.
Are we ready for the question? The question is on the amendment that the witness list be limited to the Association of Canadian Advertisers. What's the will of the committee? Can we do a show of hands? All those in favor of the amendment that the only witness to be called at this Thursday's meeting be the Association of Canadian Advertisers, raise your hand. All those opposed? The amendment is defeated. Is there any debate on the main motion? Seeing none, I guess we're ready for the question. So the main motion is that we hear from witnesses this Thursday for 1 hour prior to clause by clause on Bill C-252. Do I have it right, Ms. Goodrich? Okay.
I would request a recorded division.
Okay, a recorded division. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Hanley.
I heartily oppose.
Mr. Jahari.
Oppose.
Mr. Pawlowski.
Against.
Ms. Sidhu.
Opposed.
Mr. Vancouverden.
Against.
Mr. Ellis.
For.
Mrs. Goodrich.
In favor.
Mr. Genereux.
In favor.
Mr. Kitchen.
In favor.
Monsieur Thériault.
Je suis contre.
Mr. Davies.
Against.
Yeas pour 4, nays contre 7.
So the motion is defeated. We'll now proceed with rounds of questions, starting with Ms. Goodrich, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, thank you. I appreciate the work that has gone into this, and I do think that this is very important for the health of our children and for society as a whole. I do think it's disappointing that we weren't able to hear from witnesses. So my question to Ms. Latancio is, which witnesses did you consult, and did you hear directly from the advertisers and have meetings with them prior to bringing forward this private members bill?
Thank you for the question. I have met with Coalition du Bois du Québec. I have met with several senators. I have met with one representative of the, I believe it was from the person who is behind ad standards with regards to the code. But I've also read the transcriptions and the Hansards in terms of what had transpired in previous years, both in the House and at the Senate. I've read every single record of every witness with regards to previous years before bringing forth this bill. And of course, in communities, parents in my community, yeah.
That it was important to talk to stakeholders that might be against this bill. You decided to cherry pick and only meet proactively with stakeholders that you knew would be in favor of this bill.
So first thing is first, let me clarify. I did not cherry pick. I spoke with the individuals that I told you before, and when you look at the transcripts in the years that have transpired, you will see that all stakeholders were able to submit. Are you going to wait for me to finish? So I read.
Actually, in this committee, we have a precedence where if someone asks a question, the presenter gets to answer with approximately the same amount of time. And so in the first answer, I let you go on because I did ask you a question that required you to actually finish, but I'm not going to let you just continue talking the clock because that is not the precedence of this committee. Frankly, I'm concerned to hear that rather than talk one-on-one with concerned stakeholders, you decided to cherry pick, go based on previous evidence that was presented for previous bills under previous contexts, and not actually meet with a variety of stakeholders, and that is concerning, and that should be concerning for all Canadians.
I think that your question is biased, and I think that you are putting words in my mouth because I did not cherry pick.
So you decided to just not meet with organizations such as the Food and Beverage Association or the Canadian Marketing?
I met with the stakeholders that I announced previously, and I have read testimony that have been transcribed and filed into the records of both the House of Commons and the Senate.
I'm on my side, from my office, I've received correspondence from a number of different groups and people concerned wanting to appear as witnesses on this bill. Have you had people reach out to your office similarly about this bill with their concerns?
I have.
And have you met with them?
Via Zoom, I have.
I just think that it's a space where this has good intentions, but if it's not put forward in a way that's actually enforceable and doable, it could end up being a whole bunch of regulation without actually having impact on what we're trying to achieve, which is healthy kids. And so that's something that I think is very important. And I know that you have brought forward this bill. It has been well studied, and I think the work of Senator Nancy Green-Rain was exceptional. And I'm not trying to disparage any of the previous work, but the context has changed. The reality on the ground has changed. We can't just read transcripts from 5 years ago and say this is good enough. That's not how my constituents and people in Fort McMurray Cold Lake expect me to bring things forward.
I can tell you what has changed is that the rate of obesity has increased over the years. And as was mentioned previously, a voluntary code has been put forward, but it has done very little to be able to reverse the trend in the increase in obesity. And so therefore, the issue is a very pressing one, and I would hope that committee members would support moving this bill along to be able to tackle this very important issue affecting our children.
I think my time is up. I'll cede my time to the committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goodrich. Mr. Van Koeveren, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try to share some time with my colleague, Dr. Hanley, but I'd also like to know if it's possible to invite Dr. Sharma up so we could ask some questions on the science.
Yes, of course. That's why they're here. Dr. Sharma, if you could please take your place up by Ms. Latanzio, that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. MP Latanzio, I just wanted to say thank you for your work on this bill. It's extraordinarily important. Thank you for picking up where other parliaments have left off. I think you've been an extraordinary ambassador for this, and not having any questions for you does not mean that I don't think that you've done an impressive job. I just have two very short questions for Dr. Sharma before I pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Hanley. Hi, Dr. Sharma. I just have two questions. One, do you feel like there's been adequate and thorough industry consultation on this bill over the last 5 years?
In terms of, I can speak to our consultations that we've done, because in parallel to the process that's going on with the private members bill, as a department, we're working on regulations and policy on this area as well. So, and I can say in terms of the Canadian Beverage Association in particular, we've met with them at least 3 or 4 times in the last 4 months alone. Obviously, anytime there's policy development, we work with stakeholders, and as regulations come forward, there's a full consultation process as well. But even in the policy development, we always consult with a wide range of stakeholders to make sure that we have that information to best develop the policies.
Fantastic. So past, present, and future sectors have been consulted. That's great. One other question, Dr. Sharma. Is the science ambiguous about whether or not marketing to kids leads to negative health outcomes when we're talking about sugary drinks and unhealthy snacks?
What we do know about the science is that exposure to advertising in children really is different based on their developmental stages. So we know that, for example, the youngest of children cannot even differentiate between what advertising is and what a television program might be or a YouTube video might be. As they get older, they are available, they have the ability to differentiate, but they don't necessarily understand how that might be influencing their behavior. So that's one part of it. We do know that exposure to advertising also affects attitudes in children's preferences, food choices, and consumption patterns. And so that's part of the exposure part of it. Obviously, obesity and healthy eating and healthy living is multifactorial. So, that's why we have a suite of policies to be able to make sure that children are able to get the nutrition that they need and that are not overly influenced or exposed to advertising that potentially could lead them to making poor food choices. And then there's also the what we call the pester power of children, where they are being directly marketed to, and therefore that then translates into specific requests to parents or caregivers as well.
I'd be most interested to hear the French translation for pest or power. Go ahead, Dr. Hanley.
Thanks. I'll continue the line of questioning. And just to continue, I think you mentioned, Dr. Sharma, other pillars. So to my mind, this is the missing pillar of a healthy eating strategy for Canadians. And can you maybe very briefly say how this complements existing policies?
Yeah, well, and just to be clear, we don't have regulations or a policy that's been brought forward at this point in time. Obviously, the bill is dealing with legislation, so that's enabling legislation, and then under that would come regulations to be able to better define the scope of the intent, what it would apply to, and all of that. So just to say that all of that's being developed. But as you said, the Government of Canada has been working very hard on an overall healthy eating strategy. That includes updates to Canada's food guide, work on front-of-pack labeling as well, nutritional labeling that's been improved. This is really talking about something that's very focused. This is talking about advertising directly to children, frankly in the hopes that that would help sell product and make profits. And again, they're a unique group because they are vulnerable to that sort of exposure. So certainly, something like front-of-pack labeling, very useful, but that's really designed for adults or people that are making those purchases, not specifically to children.
And Ms. Latanzio, I want to thank you for being the champion of this really important bill. And I think part of the reason that you've become involved is through your experience as a Quebec MP. And I wonder if you could speak about the Quebec experience with a similar law around marketing to kids.
Thank you for the question, colleague. In fact, yes, I am an MP from Quebec, and as mentioned previously, we do have the Consumer Protection Act. And over the years, we have in Quebec a law that states that we cannot market to children. But this goes a little bit further because it specifically targets food, marketing food and beverages that are, like we call in French, l'alimentation malsaine, that is not healthy. And so this is a great opportunity to be able to have a policy and a framework throughout the country. But of course, Quebec has been my inspiration.
You get about 15 seconds if you have a really short question there, Doc. You good?
Thanks, I'm good.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hanley. Mr. Thériault, pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Thériault, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the member, I called her minister, but she isn't, Ms. Latanzio. You met with the Association of Canadian Advertisers? Thank you, Mr. Thériault, for your question. No, I did not meet with them. All right. You said in your opening remarks that you felt that in addition to the voluntary nature of the code that will be implemented, that it was important to have legislation. Did you look over the guide and the code? And what practices will be improved through the code and the guide by those stakeholders? Thank you again for that question. The voluntary aspect is probably the most important issue because it does not legislate, it does not provide firm requirements. It gives people a choice. Anything that is voluntary is optional. So there is no obligation. That would be my first point. And my second is that the self-regulation, that aspect is important because there is no mechanism that strictly controls this and requires a reduction in marketing to our children. Well, there must be some benefits if the Association of Advertisers is giving itself this code, even if it's voluntary, and the objectives are the same as the legislation. So both perhaps are good measures. Do you not feel that it is a good step for the advertisers to have developed measures to help with reducing obesity through their advertising? Answer. I believe that this is a step in the right direction, but does it meet the objectives that we are aiming at? I would say no, because the steps that have been taken in the past have been for the purpose of providing a framework. But the fact that the measures have been voluntary have meant that the obesity rates among children have not dropped. In fact, the percentage of children who are obese has continually risen. So there is no evidence that voluntary measures will achieve the objective of ensuring that marketing to children is not negative. Thank you. I have understood that. Have you heard from anybody that has opposed these on the government side? No. Perhaps I could ask our experts in the departments. I have a concern. There is an amendment that defines sugar and saturated fat. Can you tell us why it is important to have those definitions? So my question is for our departmental officials. Thank you. I will answer in English.
We're proposing to look at the prohibition language to include the nutrients, so sugar, saturated fat, and sodium, is to add a lot of clarity to the prohibition. This is so people know very clearly when they're offside the law and not. And so really we're trying to add precision and make sure that we're getting to really what we want to block from the advertising.
What type of definitions will be included in the regulations? Because I think it will be there that the definitions will be added. Isn't that right? So what differentiation would we see there? Yes, there's a level of sugar, or there are types of sugar, types of fats. What do you want to specify through that amendment that isn't in the bill?
Regulations that fill out the levels of those ingredients and which foods to define in the regulation. We'll be consulting and make sure that we refine that, and that will serve the prohibition up above. So it will be in the regulations that you get that form of precision.
So not just the levels. You talked about the levels, but you also want to specify the definitions. And that's really the point of my question, not the levels, but rather the definition. For example, trans fat. What do you hope to achieve by defining them?
Level of the Act, and this is the same with children, is once it's at the level of the Act, it will affect all of the instances of that word down in the regulations. So for this policy, we will refine which foods, which nutrients in those foods the prohibition will apply to.
Thank you, Mr. Lee and Mr. Thériault. Finally, Mr. Davies, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Congratulations, Ms. Latanzio. It's always, I think, a special day in the life of any parliamentarian when they can actually introduce legislation, and I think I'm very proud to support this legislation. I think it's overdue, and I think it'll make a real difference in terms of the health of children over time. To you, Ms. Latanzio, or maybe Dr. Sharma, I'm not sure, you've mentioned Quebec, but I'm wondering, are there any other jurisdictions that have introduced similar bans on marketing of unhealthy foods to children? And if so, is there any evidence of what the impact of that measure has been?
Do you want to? Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Davies. I know that there have been a few countries, European countries, the UK, Chile, and Spain, who have introduced similar legislation. Mexico also in 2014 and Chile in 2016. So it's called the M2K, the Marketing to Children, Marketing to Kids legislation. They have gone back and they've reported success in terms of the positive aspects of limiting marketing to kids. I can tell you that UK's legislation focuses on restrictions for television between 5:30 a.m. And 9 p.m. and a total ban on paid ads online. So Spain and the UK are also developing the M2K legislation after not observing positive impacts from industry self-regulation, and Spain's legislation is still being developed.
Thank you. So you've kind of anticipated where I'm going next, Ms. Latanzio, which is a peer-reviewed article from August 2022 on food marketing to children concluded, and I'm quoting, "Unhealthy food marketing to children and adolescents is extensive, and current self-regulatory policies are insufficient at reducing the presence of such marketing," end quote. Is that correct? And Dr. Sharma, do you have anything to add to that?
In terms of, so just as an example, I think you referred to the initiative that was already, the Canadian Nutrition Initiative that was already there, the Canadian Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative, which is a self-regulatory measure that's already in place. And when we looked at the ads that were directed to children and teens for foods that were high in salt, sugar, fat, 3/4 of those ads were from industry that were signatories to that initiative. So when we're looking at, and when we look at voluntary measures, they are that. So they are voluntary. They are limited to the signatories, but as we just noted, even if you are a signatory, it may not necessarily influence that behavior. In terms of the proposal that we've seen for the self-guide, there's also challenges in terms of the advertising criteria that are defined. They don't have the nutrient criteria for products is incomplete as well. The review process is not an independent process, so if something happens on the compliance and enforcement side, there's not an independent process to deal with that.
Can I just zero in on one thing? So since 2007, since that industry-launched voluntary code has come into place, what has happened in that time period? It's about 16 years in terms of the health of children or obesity rates in Canada. Have they gone up, down, stayed the same?
They've gone up. At this point in time, 1 in 3 children in Canada are defined as either overweight or obese. For Indigenous children, that's 2 out of every 3 Indigenous children meet that criteria, and that criteria is based on your body mass index and the charts. And so that's been increasing.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a kind of a technical question. According to Health Canada's consultation report, some stakeholders indicated that there should be exemptions from the ban, in particular sponsorship of sports teams, community events, and school events and activities. The Food and Drugs Act defines advertisement as, quote, any representation by any means whatever for the purpose of promoting directly or indirectly the sale or disposal of any food, drug, cosmetic, or device. Under this bill, would the prohibition on advertising extend to sponsorship, use of brand elements such as cartoon characters and packaging, labeling, sales, promotions, and endorsements? In other words, are there exemptions in this bill that would permit that kind of advertising?
So you'll see in the bill that there is a placeholder for regulation to define which advertising would attract the prohibition. So that's for a policy discussion to talk about sponsorship and other things to see what would be within scope. So that would be refined.
Do you know if internally is it the I guess the desire of the department to use that definition in the Food and Drugs Act of advertisement?
So advertising, yes, it's already in the Act. It's very, very broad, but there's a cue in this particular proposal to be able to refine that in the regulations.
Refine it in what way? Make it broader, narrower? What's the thinking behind having that exemption?
It couldn't be broader because you can't broaden something up in the act, but certainly refining it to make sure that we're all very clear about which activities in advertising would apply under the prohibition.
Tanzio, do you want to see any narrowing of that definition?
I definitely do. I mean, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, you know, there are activities that happen in our parks in summer, soccer, and there are, you know, exhibitions, and it's part of the community life, if you want. But I think that what I would like to see is if there's a sponsor that we limit, like we do in Quebec, if there's a particular company and we only have the name of the company and it's not attached to a cartoon character next to it or a series of colors and color patterns or, you know, something that would drive the child or entice the child to be able to connect and make the connection between the two is where I would sort of like set the fine line. But I will leave that up to consultation when that will take place in terms of being defined and refined in the regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Latenzio. Mr. Davies, that concludes the questions from each of the parties, and we are now going to move to clause-by-clause consideration of the bill. Pursuant to Standing Order 75, Sub 1, consideration of Clause 1, the short title, and of the preamble are postponed. And therefore, the Chair calls Clause 2. Is there any discussion in connection with Clause 2? Mr. Van Couverden?
Hi, we would propose that we delete and oppose Clause 2.
Sorry?
We would propose that we oppose or delete Clause 2 entirely.
Okay. So I think the best course of action then is to simply vote against Clause 2 as opposed to call for its deletion. All right. Is there, other than Mr. Van Couverden's wish to vote against it, is there any other discussion on Clause 2? Mr. Davies.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chair. When we say Clause 2, do we mean Section 2? Are we using that interchangeably? So, Clause,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Dr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear here, so what Mr. Van Couverden is proposing is that the words Food and Drug Act 2, Section 2, all of that is deleted. Is that correct?
That's precisely my understanding, is that is that Clause 2 does not carry, and therefore it would not be included in the bill. But we're going to put it to a vote here as soon as the discussion is concluded. Mr. Davies?
Briefly, what the rationale for that is. I mean, this would remove the words Food and Drug Acts and then remove the word Section 2 of the Food and Drug Act as amended by adding the following in alphabetical order. And then there's a definition of children. What is the purpose of that amendment and what is the impact of it?
All right. Mr. Van Couverden, would you like to explain why you're going to vote against Clause 2?
The proposed deletion of Clause 2 under the FDA regarding children's ages, they continue to operate effectively. So defining children as people under 13 years of age under Section 2 would contradict regulations that use the term children in reference to different age groups. So there are already specific regulations for food intended for children 1 year of age or older, but less than 4 years of age. So if there's any other points of clarification, I'd turn to officials, because that's about where my level of knowledge on this is gets to.
Officials have anything to add to why one might be inclined to vote against Clause 2?
Just to support that idea that once the term is defined in the level of the Act, you don't want to see a lot of variance in the regulation. And we do have the mention of children quite often in the food and drug regulations for things like children's dosing for medication. So they're very important. and they don't resemble the under 13.
Further interventions? Seeing none, shall Clause 2 carry? Show of hands, please. Shall Clause 2 carry? Okay, all those in favor of the adoption of Clause 2 as presented, please raise your hand. Are those opposed to the passage of Clause 2? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I see 6 opposed, 5 in favor. So Clause 2 is negated.
Sorry. Apologies, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify. So we were voting to keep Clause 2 or get rid of Clause 2, and we weren't voting on what was suggested by Mr. Vancouverton to just I just was...
Because that was an amendment.
I thought he made an amendment, so I thought we were voting for the amendment.
No,
Sorry.
It's, you're right, Ms. Goodrich. He said, I'd like Clause 2 to be deleted, and
Yeah.
I said to him, well, then you should vote against it, and then the debate continued on Clause 2, and we just voted against it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I think
Eliminate Clause 2, in support of eliminating Clause 2. Okay, that's...
Just for clarity, colleagues, we have just defeated Clause 2. That's what has just happened. All right. We are now at Clause 3. The question before you is, shall Clause 3 carry? Any discussion? Seeing none, shall Clause 3 carry? All those in favor of Clause 3? All those in favor of Clause 3, please raise your hand. All those opposed to Clause 3, please raise your hand. I see 6 votes against Clause 3 and none in favor. Clause 3 is therefore defeated. That takes us to Clause 4. And I see that a few amendments have been proposed to Clause 4. The first one I will call is G1 as an amendment to Clause 4. Any discussion on G1? Sorry? All right. I'm advised that the proper procedure requires that someone move G1 and that someone can't be me. Do we have a mover? Mr. Vancouverton is moving G1. Would you like to speak to it, Mr. Vancouverton? No. Any discussion on G1? Dr. Kitchen and then Ms. Goodrich.
Just a point of clarification. I'm taking this to mean we're taking out advertising directed at children, correct? That's what the motion is?
I would turn to Mr. Vancouverton or the officials to answer that.
That's correct.
Thank you. But why was it put in the first place? I mean,
So there's more than just that wording. That wording is just changed around. It goes from directed primarily to primarily directed. It's just the government drafters have phrased it that way, but it's the same intent. You want to get at, the prohibition is really aimed at advertising that really is targeting the child, so that carries the meaning. The other point to make is that we're tightening up the language of the prohibition, really because there's some terms that, like child's diets. It's a bit vague for a prohibition to be able to enforce and interpret. So it's just tightening those aspects up.
Mr. Davies?
I just want to make sure I understand the proposed amendment. I had thought it was proposed to be deleted because it's redundant. When I'm looking at the draft act, I see in larger font advertising directed at children, and then underneath it in smaller font but bolded advertising directed at children. Are we talking about, I thought we were just talking about deleting the part in bold because it's redundant, or are you talking about deleting all reference to advertising directed at children?
Is if we're just talking about the subtitle, that's just a technical issue. The Act is organized with certain subtitles, and we don't usually put in a subtitle under a provision like general or food, so it's just tidying up and keeping the integrity of the statute. Sorry, I was speaking to the next motion.
Okay,
So
so this is for Mr. Davies and Mr. Lee. We have a couple of experts here from Legislative Council, and they are also here to assist us and to answer questions of a technical nature. So, Mr. Lee, if you're comfortable with the questions, fine. If any of them would prefer, if anyone would prefer to direct the questions to the lawyers in the front of the room, then they're welcome to do that as well. Back to Mr. Davies.
So to make sure I understand it, it would delete both references, so there'd be no reference to advertising directed to children. If I understand the rationale, it's because the actual section says primarily at persons who are under 13, and you don't want confusion. If you had the title directed at children, the reader would be unclear if it meant under 18 or under 13. Is that sort of the...
Again, it's just a subtitle. There is primarily directed still in the text
Yeah.
of the provision. So that's still there, that concept, so that's not being eliminated. It's just the subtitle is being taken out so that the integrity, the way the Act works, is preserved. So we're not losing the concept from the prohibition.
Could we not just say then, could we not amend the title to say advertising primarily directed at children? Or would that still leave the issue of the age?
If I may, I think the issue is that there's a title at all, because the Act just works in terms of segmenting the parts of the Act. We'll know what this provision is by the way it operates, but we don't put in subtitles like that in the rest of the Act, so we're just urging that this is like all the other provisions.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodrich?
For a rare change of pace, Mr. Davies basically covered all of my questions in a very succinct way, so I'll pass.
Any further discussion on Amendment G1? Dr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. You know, and maybe I'm missing something here, but the amendment seems pretty clear that all we're doing, as Mr. Davies said, getting rid of the bold words. It's very clear. Are we getting rid of the words above it as well?
They don't exist.
This is insanity.
They don't actually exist.
Okay.
These don't exist?
No.
That it's exactly the opposite, that the import of the amendment is to get rid of the title that says advertising directed at children and to retain the part in bold. Just, okay, you're going to hear from Legislative Counsel. Mr. Vave, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's being proposed here is to remove the first reference to advertise directed at children in the bigger case. It is, as Mr. Lee was indicating, it's really just a header subtitle that once this, if this were to be adopted, once it fits into the amending statute, wouldn't need to appear again. The smaller reference, the second reference, advertised directed at children, that would remain. It's what we would call a marginal note, so it sort of provides the basis for what the subject matter is of that section right there. So the proposal here would be to leave the second one, and it would be to remove the first reference to it as it's redundant.
Okay, Ms. Goodridge and then Dr. Kitchen.
So then if I'm using the lines from the text, we're deleting the one, but that isn't line 18, so it kind of screws everything else up, and it makes the amendment G2 problematic as well.
Mr. Vive, please.
It's because of the numbering sequence. The marginal note, which is the second reference, isn't actually counted as one of the lines. So line 18 is like the text above, which is the first instance of advertising directed at children. I don't make the rules.
Dr.
So line 18 is actually line 17.
Dr. Kitchen.
I won't get into that debate.
Dr. Kitchen.
Well, that's was my issue was, as my colleague just said, counting back from line 20, line 18 would be a smaller point, advertising directed at children, not the bigger one. And if that's the case, then short title, we have short title and short title. Short title, is that a line or is that not a line? Because how do you count these lines?
Yeah, Mr. Kitchen, it's the exact opposite of what you just suggested. So line 18 would be the first instance of advertising directed at children. The reference, the heading with the bigger font. Because the second one, advertising directed at children, the lowercase one, is what we call a marginal note, and we don't count that as one of the lines for purposes of counting lines in legislation.
Is there any further discussion, any questions in connection with Amendment G1? Seeing none, shall G1 carry? G1 is carried on division. That brings us to G2. We need someone to move G2, please. Mr. Vancouverton has moved G2. Is there any discussion on Amendment G2? Dr. Kitchen and then Dr. Ellis.
So just for clarification, therefore, this would say, subject to the regulations, no person shall advertise prescribed foods that contain more than prescribed levels of sugar. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mr. Vave, that's what I see. Is that what you see?
Yep, that's correct.
That's correct. Any Dr. Ellis is next. Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair, thank you very much. The prescribed foods, now, is that going to come by regulation, or where is it coming from? And prescribed levels of sugars, where's the answer to that?
Mr. Vave, can you help us with that? Mr. Lee or Dr. Sharma, can you help us with that?
So yes. So the challenge with the way that it's currently worded are things like children's diets is not defined, so it's a bit vague. So then adding prescribed in those two areas allows then governing council to make regulations to define the scope of that. And it's important to do that for children compared to other things because they have different nutrient requirements. So that would have to be tailored to, depending on what the overall scope of the regulations would be, they would need to correspond with that. So just as an example, for front of pack labeling, we use certain percentages for front of pack labeling, but those are really designed for adults. Those may not necessarily apply to children. So it's to allow that to happen through regulation.
Thank you, Chair. But doesn't that then mean you're going to have one, are they going to be weight-based? Are they going to be age-based? I mean, this is complicated if we're talking about infants all the way to at least 13 and in some instances, according to some of the other amendments, up to age 17 who would, perhaps be as big as adults. So what is the plan there? Is it going to be weight-based or how's this going to work?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is that it would only apply up to children up to the age of 13, the way that this is framed. And then, there would be a process to be able to define how to best do that. And then, depending on how broad or narrow those parameters are, then we would either have to do that, we can do it by age-based or weight-based, or there may be parameters that would apply to that whole group from the age of 0 to 13 that may be applicable. So, again, it's something that we would work through policy and then through regulations. And, of course, all of that would be consulted on.
Dr. Pawlowski?
is prescribed in the definition section of the Food and Drug Act, or is that required? Is it automatic to prescribed means by regulation? Is it defined in the Act?
Is it for Mr. Vave or Dr. Sharma? Who wants that one? Dr. Sharma, Mr. Lee.
It's not prescribed in the sense that a prescriber would administer. It means by regulation. So this is a food identified by regulation, and it's not defined in the Act.
But is that in the definition section of the Act, or is that automatically assumed that prescribed means by regulation?
The use of prescribed before whatever it defines points down to one's defined by regulation. It's a convention that you'll see throughout the Act.
Goodrich?
So effectively, by changing the words from excess to prescribed, we are giving who will be the deciding factor on which foods make that prescribed list. Is it something that is set out by like government and council? Is it something that can be at the whim of any government, or is this something that Health Canada perhaps sets?
This would be by Government Council. So it would be a full regulatory package that would go through the usual process and then go through that process.
Okay, so just to, because I'm curious at this point now, would something like ground beef be considered to be prescribed in excess and therefore couldn't be marketed to children?
Again, I think the policy goes by nutrient, so it's really looking at which foods contain a certain nutrient at a certain level, and that's really what the regs will get at. The regulations will say the levels of the ingredients, and it's the three ingredients here. So sodium, sugar, saturated fat. So those are the ones that we'll assess and then put a level around.
And perhaps to add, it would just be focused on the advertising primarily directed at children part of that. It wouldn't affect any of these products' ability to be sold or to be advertised to adults or in a variety of other places. It's really very narrowly focused on advertising directed towards children of certain products.
Mr. Davies and then Dr. Ellis.
Thanks. Well, I see the pros and cons of both. I mean, the original text speaks broadly of foods and beverages that contribute to excess sugar. What I like about that is that it's very broad. What I suppose is difficult, it would be difficult for advertisers, is to know precisely what that is. So in the new text, it's got the advantage of being certain. A person could go to the regulations and they'll see exactly what is prescribed that they can't advertise. But it'll be narrower. Is there any concern? I guess the proof's in the pudding then. It's going to be whether this act is effective or not. It's going to depend on how comprehensive and accurate the prescribed list is. Can you give us any comfort as to how broad or not that list will be? Or, and my second part of that question is, could there not be a little bit of catch-up in that as the industry develops new products that are not on the prescribed list? Will this be an endless attempt by government to catch up to clever advertisers who come up with a new product, and then you got to amend the regulations? Is there any concern about that?
On the first part, I think we can't pre-anticipate what the Government Council will say yes to, but certainly the department has been really looking into the policy, making sure that we give effect to the important prohibition, basically, because that's what this refines. So to your point, there may be some changes, but again, we're trying to focus on the nutrients. So if the food contains a certain amount of something, that really triggers us to say the prohibition applies, and that's what the regulations will do.
And perhaps to add, I mean, this is at the legislative level. So broad is good in one respect. Vague and subject to interpretation can often be a bit problematic. So again, excess to what, how are we defining what a children's diet is? That's why it gets a bit more complicated. And absolutely, I mean, I think what we've seen is that when you put measures in place, then industry does shift to move around them. But having the flexibility to make those changes in regs is certainly much easier than to have it potentially something that's wired into in legislation.
Dr. Ellis?
Thank you, Chair. And I guess I'll direct this to Dr. Sharma and Mr. Lee. Am I confused here, or is this going to be to try to create an exhaustive list of foods? Is milk going to be a part of this? So if we're not making, I see you shaking your heads, if we're not making a list of proscribed foods, then why do we need that in there? Why can't this simply be based on, you know, what does it say here, sugars, fat, or sodium? I don't understand why prescribed foods needs to be in there. As I said, you know, eggs can form an important part of the diet of children, as we know milk does, cow's milk does. I guess my concern would be that this is going to capture certainly some foods, in quotations, unfairly. So I really, it seems duplicitous to put foods and then talk about the levels of nutrients, in quotations. So if someone could explain that to me and how that's going to work, because in this instance, to me, it sounds like you're going to try to make a list of foods that every, you know, sugary candy is going to be on this list, and the chance of missing something is significant.
What we're trying to get at here, again, is not a list of foods. That would be very hard to enforce and to keep up with. So it's really the level of nutrient is going to be the first part of the policy discussion. But there may be some foods, to your point, that can have a beneficial effect. That's what we need to see as the regulations go forward. And I would turn to Dr. Sharma about that kind of discussion coming in, so that we're really focusing the advertising prohibition on the right sort of set of foods. But we wouldn't be naming foods on a list. That's not the intention.
Dr. Ellis. Sorry, Mr. Lee, but if we're talking about some foods might be good for children, which I think we can agree upon, there's no way in this particular piece of legislation to capture those foods that might be good for children, if they are over the recommended amount of fat, for instance, let's say. So you mentioned that briefly, but I don't understand how this legislation is going to capture those things that may be unduly prescribed to be on your list.
So if the design, if I could suggest, if the design was just, these are the nutrients that we're looking at and here are the levels, that might be true. But because we've got prescribed foods, that gives us some work to do in the regulations about foods that may not be attracted here, but also the levels. So those, again, will be the main activities in the regulations.
And just to add, I mean, that's part of the need to clarify the language. So, for example, in the proposed language, if it says something contributes to increased sugars, that could be almost anything that has sugar and it could contribute to. The idea of being able to prescribe them is then, you know, as Mr. Lee has said, it's not going to be a list of chocolate bars and things like that, but to put it into categories. And again, those categories are informed by, you know, the nutrition science and what should be in that category. Even beyond those categories, then if there are products that are unnecessarily scoped in, then there's processes to be able to do exemptions as well. So I guess, I mean, it's challenging to have the debate not seeing the regulations or the policy developed, but that's what, I mean, that's the notion of having legislation that's enabling, and then having obviously a regulatory process that then defines those. And again, it has to speak to the intent of the legislation and the regulations. What you're intending to do in this case is to stop marketing of products that could potentially contribute to unhealthy lifestyles in children.
Dr. Ellis?
Thank you very much. I guess part of it, there's no definition in here that says there could possibly be exemptions to the list. And that causes me certainly a situation for pause to understand that maybe that needs to be better defined in the legislation, to say that there is a process that's ongoing, and if we're going to talk about exemptions, then I think it really behooves the members of this committee to understand that there could possibly be exemptions to this, and if so, what's the process for determining that? Who's the arbiter thereof to say there are exemptions? Is there going to be an opportunity for people such as Dairy Farmers of Canada to make an application, to the arbiters thereof. I think the reason it's germane to bring this up and perhaps belabor something that seems to be small is we all know that milk historically had been a significant part of diets and school programs, and we've seen that substance banned from certain schools to say, oh, no, you shouldn't have that. But we all know that that the protein in milk can form a very important part of a child's diet, even though the fat content perhaps may be what's cause for concern. I don't know why the discontent or malcontent with milk came about. I guess that's, to me, is a modern day example of what would create pause for me. So my question therefore would be, we know there's examples where this has occurred before. There's no mention of how to get an exemption, and there's no mention of who the final arbiter and decision maker is. So to me, those are causes for concern, and perhaps maybe the legal experts will be able to say how we can better rectify that. Or not.
All right. Is that one for Legislative Council or for the officials? Mr. Vafe? Dr. Sharma or Mr. Lee?
In the Act, there is a specific way to do exemptions. It's in 30 sub J, our regulation making powers, so we can make an exemption, but that's always by regulation. So the arbiter is always the governor and council on those. But with this language, I think it points to us specifying also in regulations which foods would be under the prohibition. So it wouldn't be perhaps a classic exemption, but it does help us sort through which foods would be appropriate.
And perhaps just to add, that's the process that's been used for all of the healthy eating strategy initiatives. So food labeling goes through that process, front of pack labeling goes through that process, where there is a pathway to make those regulations, and then it's understood that then there's a pathway to potentially entertain exemptions if that needs to happen.
All right, Dr. Pawlowski.
I think my question might get to the same source of confusion. So the legislation is the bones, the meat, the specifics is in the regulations. However, here within these amendments, there's no reference to the power of the minister to make certain regulations, right? That's in the Food and Drug Act itself, right? Do you have that section that you could talk, because that may clarify some of these things, because the minister in the Act has the power to make regulations with respect to A, B, C, D, E, and that's what they're going to use in making these regulations to kind of fill in the substance of this Act, right? But do you have those sections to tell us what the minister may regulate, or is it a vast, long list?
Over to you, Mr. Lee, Dr. Sharma.
So there are several regulation-making powers in the Act. Some of them are given to the minister, but usually for things like emergencies. But there is a list of governor and council regulations in Section 30 of the Act, and that lists out pretty exhaustively what the minister can prompt to make regulations about through the process of governor and council. The exemption power, as I mentioned, is governor and council. It's not something that the minister has a power to do. But the minister can prompt that by making a proposal to governor and council.
On the speakers list, we have Ms. Goodridge next, and then Dr. Kitchen and Mr. Davies. Ms. Goodridge, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that this has opened as many questions as it's answered, and I guess one of the pieces is, and I don't think that this is the right time to do this, but I'd like to bring forward an amendment to have exclusions directly clarified so that single item food products could be excluded, so things like eggs or milk. Some of our produce could just very clearly be excluded right off the hop, because I think that would clarify some things for our agricultural producers that produce some of the best agriculture in the world right here. And they do direct to children, and it is healthy, and it is important to signal that some foods, like all things in moderation, like go back to what my grandma used to always tell us, like things in moderation are important. If you feed your child all eggs, that's not healthy. If you feed them all milk, that's not healthy. But eggs and milk contribute to a healthy diet for many children. And so I think that that's a piece, but I'm sure the legal counsel is saying that that's not an appropriate time to bring forward this amendment. So, but I'm just wondering if you could clarify if something like that would be appropriate in this section of the bill.
Okay. Ms. Goodrich, you've made reference to a further amendment, and the debate is presently on an amendment. It's abundantly clear that we're not going to get all the way through clause by clause today. If I might suggest that after today's meeting and before the continuation, if you could consult with Legislative Counsel to get the wording and the details and all the legalities of what should come forward to encapsulate what you've done, that's probably the most efficient way to proceed. And with that friendly suggestion, do you still have a question that you want answered?
I guess it still stands to, is this the right section to put in an exclusion such as that?
It's a little hard to comment in the abstract, but I do point to the exemption power already in place in the Food and Drugs Act, so you wouldn't need to reduplicate that. That's available for across the Act. Having said that, I think the intent of being able to prescribe foods points to a regulatory discussion about what's included and what's not included.
Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I too are having some, as we go into it more, I'm getting more and more confused. I hate to say that, but the conversation of prescribed is there, but who's making that prescription aspect? And I think part of my thoughts may be solved by what Dr. Pawlowski suggested is if you can provide for us that those parameters that we could at least, because we're not going to get through this today, we could at least have that to give us a chance to review that and understand that a lot better. There are obviously concerns in the sense that I get this is on advertising and stealing and looking at advertising as we look, but when, as my colleagues have mentioned about our milk products, you know, what great value they are for our youth, from the bone structure, from the multiple vitamins that are provided to it. And then we look historically where we've seen butter, which at one point was all of a sudden said that was bad. And now we're realizing the science is saying that's not the case anymore. And everyone jumped to margarine, to butter. And perhaps some of those industries might want to advertise for youth. And so I just want to make certain that they aren't being restricted in that manner. And I think if we can maybe get that provided, it would be of assistance to us.
I mean, certainly we can do that, and the intent is not to confuse anyone through the process, but obviously clause by clause and the details can be very detailed. So I think what we're saying is that the proposal is to put something in at the level of legislation that's enabling, so enabling the restriction of the marketing of products, certain products to children. There are already provisions at the level of the Act to make exemptions. All of those would actually be defined by the Governor and Council through the regulation making process. What is in, what might be out, what the parameters are, how things are defined. So all of those operational questions are there. And again, there's a very well-defined process for regulation making, as we all know, that involves, you know, all of the considerations, making sure that you can have not only the health rationale for this, but also there has to be a cost-benefit analysis that's done. You have to look at intended consequences, unintended consequences. There has to be a very rigorous and fulsome consultation process that's open to everyone. So that's the guardrails that are up on that process. But certainly, if there's a desire to have the parts of the Act that would support the development of the exemptions, we can provide that.
Mr. Davies and then Mr. Theriault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a little bit of difficulty over exemptions because of the wording. It says the proposed text would be subject to the regulations. No person shall advertise prescribed foods that contain more than that. So everything's going to be allowed except what is prescribed not to be. So I'll just put that out there. I'm not quite sure what exemption we mean, other than there's exemptions when it comes to exemptions to the definition of advertising. But in terms of the foods, there should be no exemptions because we're going to be listing a positive list. I'm envisioning a schedule of prescribed foods that you can't advertise. If it's not on the list, you can advertise it. But my question really is to help us understand what the prescribed foods would be. You've made an indication like we're not going to have, Kit Kat, Coca-Cola, etc. Can you give us an example? And you must have some idea. What will we see on this list when we say prescribed foods? I think you've said, Dr. Sharma, that this is it's categories. So give us a flavor for what that list may look like.
And again, it's all, because obviously the policy would have to be developed and the regulations would have to be developed. But as an example, is something that we used in front of pack labeling. So we've defined what high in is for products, and there's a percentage. So a percentage of those nutrients in those products. Again, we want to take a look at it to make sure that whatever those categories might be, that they're appropriate for children, because this is focused specifically on children. And again, it's the advertising. So again, butter is an example. I'm not sure how many butter advertisements directed specifically at kids there might be, but if there is, for some reason, a product that's captured in that, and then there's a case to be made why that should not be included, that's why there are provisions for exemptions.
If I could just drill in a little bit, though. Are we talking about prescribed foods that contain more than the prescribed level of sugars? Because it said twice. That's prescribed foods that contain more than the prescribed levels. Or are we talking about foods that contain more than the prescribed level of sugars? You see, in the latter, you don't need to have the prescribed foods. You're just going to be setting levels. No food that contains more than blank amount of sodium or whatever shall be advertised for children. But you see, in this case, the prescribed is said twice. So you got a list of foods and the amount of prescribed. So again, I want to know what's in your mind when we say what kind of foods will be prescribed. It's not just the constituents, it's both.
So yes, that's correct. It's a double prescribed, and that's intentional. So prescribed ingredients means we go to the levels, and the regs can now do that. That's the operation of that word. In terms of foods, exactly what Dr. Sharma just said, the policy envisages that not all foods would be appropriate to fall under this policy. And so it invites the Governor and Council, when we make regulations, to study which are those, but it entitles the Governor and Council to make those regulations.
So there could be foods that would otherwise exceed the prescribed levels of sugars or saturated fats that the government chooses not to list because of some of the reasons we've heard from my colleagues. I understand. Thank you.
Mr. Thériault, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought that I had understood, but I am going to have to ask the same questions as Mr. Davies, and now I think I didn't understand anything. The phobia of legislators is the regulations that we never get to see. And we understand. I've been listening very carefully. We understand that we want to prevent advertising that would have a negative effect on children's eating habits. So I understand that. But I would like to have some examples. I was hoping for some, but you didn't give us any. It seems to me that you should be able to give us some examples. You say foods. We think of foods as not being the constituent ingredients. You talk about prescribed twice. There are foods on the market, and when I saw this, I thought, well, there are things that you can buy, and they won't be eliminated, but yet they would exceed the prescribed levels, then they won't be able to be advertised to children. That's what I understood. But now that I've heard your explanation, I understand even less. So there will be a list of constituent nutrients, ingredients, and that will be added to the list of what is acceptable. There will be levels that will have to be prescribed in regulations. And here I am as a legislator. I am sort of handing over all that power. We're doing this blindfolded in a way. For example, there was an advertisement in Quebec, and I imagine there was no complaint to the consumers agency because there has to be a complaint in Quebec in order to take action. So there was an ad that was aimed at children and for something that would have been on this list. Are you saying that that kind of ad would not be allowed? It seems to be too abstract to me. We need some reassurance as legislators. I was very satisfied with the original wording. So why is the original wording not good enough for the department, or the government? Okay, they had an amendment to propose, and I feel that my questions haven't been answered, and I'm trying to understand.
So first of all, to the issues with the current wording, we're concerned about being able to enforce with wording around children's diets, for example, that will be hard for us to understand. So there's a lot of interpretive room in there, and that was some of the original concern. In terms of the way the prohibition will work as we add regulations, there are clear categories that we have talked about in public: salty snacks, sugary drinks. So there'll be very broad categories where the whole intent of the policy is that you're not trying to get children to tell the parents to buy these. And so those will be laid out. It may be that there are some exceptional foods where we consider those aren't suitable for the policy. But from broad categories, we do have quite a bit of definition around the main foods we want to target.
Est-ce que vous avez des exemples?
Can you give us any examples?
Snacks, sweet candies, they're all tending to be high in sugar or sodium. And so we'll go by the ingredient, but we can also see the categories that we're really concerned about.
Poserait pas problème?
So the interpreter did not catch the question.
Offer those as examples.
Qui a un taux,
So what about something that has a high level of saturated fats? So some food, for example, that would exceed a certain level of trans fat, but might not have high sodium or high sugar. Would that be prohibited?
Snacks for children with a high degree of salt may be a very strong example, and there are many examples of those.
Okay.
An example would be something where you would have a very small quantity of something. So, for example, let's say if you have a type of jam, it might actually be high in natural sugars, but you only have a very, very small portion of that, and like you normally don't eat a tub of jam. So that might be something. That's just an example. So the idea is that you would be able to define what the product categories are and what the levels are. And certainly with nutritional science changing, those also change. So as science develops, and so to wire, if you put something in the level of the act that says, high in, what that high in is would have to be defined at the level of the act. So this enables us to then make regulations to be able to define what those products are, and again, for the advertising directly to children. The idea is not to have a whole series of exemptions, right? The idea is to have categories of foods and then levels of nutrients that this would apply to across the board. An exception would just be an exception. It would be the rare instance that something might be there that you would have to exclude from the prohibition.
Yogourt.
What about yogurt?
Yogourt. 15%.
15%, 15 grams of sugar, 18 maybe? Would that be considered acceptable, unacceptable? Would that be on the list? What about a yogurt-type snack?
Excellent example of exactly this. So when you go into the grocery store, half an entire aisle is yogurt. Some of those might be suitable for children to be part of a children's regular diet. Some of them may be very high in fat, very high in sugars as well, so maybe they would not be. But again, it's not to identify one product, it's to put categories in place. And the categories are, again, not that they couldn't be sold, but those shouldn't be directed at children, because what we're trying to get at is preventing children from being susceptible to marketing where they would then ask for, demand, look for these specific products that could potentially, on the face, look healthy, but when you actually look at the nutrition label, are not healthy for them.
Donc, ce qui est plus important.
So what is most important is the setting of the levels, and once the acceptable levels are established, then we will have products that will be covered. And if I were the producer, I would make sure that I produced foods that were more acceptable, and then I could advertise them. So I can understand the advantage. We're moving forward. Thank you.
I believe Dr. Ellis has a motion.
Move to adjourn.
Dr. Pelosi.
Oh, shoot.
Mr. Chair, just a point of
If I'm
order.
understanding this correctly, the two prescribed,
Just
I
a
would have
second,
thought an
just a second,
example
Dr. Pelosi.
of
Do you have a point of order, Mr. Davies?
So I didn't mean to interrupt Dr. Pelosi, but
Well,
just a point of order, it's 1:15, and I'm just, the meeting's supposed to end at 1. I know about other people, I have appointments I have to have. Do you know how long is this meeting going to go? We're clearly not going to finish.
It's going to go until somebody moves adjournment. Dr. Pelosi has the floor.
But I think an example that of a food that might exceed the prescribed levels of sugars, but you may not want to make it a prescribed food is, for example, like an apple or a mango, which probably has a lot of sugar in it over a prescribed level, but on the other hand, you're not going to ban advertising of apples or mangoes.
Absolutely, and the first part of the prescribed also allows for that. So, if you wanted to define processed foods or whole foods or other categories of foods up front and then look at nutrient levels, it gives the flexibility to do that as well. That's a very good example.
Dr. Pelosi, do you have a motion?
A motion to adjourn.
Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? We're adjourned. Thank you.